Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I'll just wait a moment for everybody to join us before we formally commence today. Good afternoon, everybody. Just welcoming everyone into the virtual room today. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa, ko Sharon tōku ingoa. I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of Australia and pay our respects to the elders, past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Indigenous Australia. Hello everybody, my name is Sharon Lloyd, General Manager of the Circle here in New Zealand, and it is my pleasure on behalf of the Circle to warmly welcome everybody attending, and a special welcome to our guest of honour, the Honourable Joe Hockey, former Ambassador of Australia to the United States and now founding partner and President of Bondi Partners. Mr. Hockey completed his term as Ambassador in January this year. Welcome home and thank you for your time to be here with us today. We are all certainly very interested to hear your perspectives on the US election. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the team at Bondi Partners, especially Anthony and Maggie, for their support of today's event. We are delighted to have special guests with us today, Rod McGeoch, Honorary Chair of the Trans-Tasman Business Circle, who will shortly introduce Mr. Hockey, and Bruce Wolpe, Senior Fellow at the United States Study Centre, who will moderate today's discussion. I also welcome Circle Founder and Managing Director Johnny Weiss, who will formally close today's event. The format for today is a moderated Q&A session. We encourage you to place your questions in the Q&A field where Bruce will receive them. A reminder that we are on the record and recording today's event and welcome members of the media in the audience today. I will now hand over to Rod to formally introduce Mr. Hockey. Thank you, Rod.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some technology running on both sides of the Tasman, but welcome. That welcome I give on behalf of everybody associated with our Trans-Tasman Business Circle. Look, it's a delight to welcome Joe Hockey. I wasn't quite as deferential as Sharon in calling him the Honourable because I've known him forever. We were in the same law firm together, me a little older than him, and he was an outstanding young lawyer that was coming up through our firm and then got attracted into the world of politics. But my job's to formally tell you a little bit about him. So, as Sharon said, before co-founding Bondi Partners, the Honourable Joe Hockey served as Australia's Ambassador to the United States of America, taking up his post in Washington in January 2016. Notably, Mr. Hockey was responsible for Australia's relationship with the US during the final year of President Obama's tenure and the first 3 years of President Trump's first term. As Ambassador, Mr. Hockey emphasised the importance of free and fair trade and investment partnerships between the US and Australia while promoting innovative infrastructure investments throughout the US. At Bondi Partners, Mr. Hockey spearheads the firm's strategic direction in both the United States and Australia. Prior to his ambassadorial appointment, Mr. Hockey served in the Australian Parliament for 19 years and held a number of ministerial portfolios, including being the Treasurer of Australia from 2013 to 2015. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we really are quite privileged to hear somebody who's still youthful, has still got an exciting career ahead of him, but has done so much already. And in doing so, I'm going to hand over to Bruce Wolpe to chair the next part of the session. But can I just point out that Fran O'Sullivan, a very distinguished journalist from New Zealand, was to take over the next session. And sadly, she's lost her voice. But she's a great friend of Australia and New Zealand and came to every one of the Australian leadership forums that I chaired along with several distinguished New Zealanders. So sad that she's not here, but we're blessed to have such a capable expert on the politics in the United States, Bruce Wolpe, and I'm glad to introduce him to you.
Thank you, Rod, so much. And I want to also thank you, Sharon, for chairing the session. Rod, Johnny Weiss, always a privilege and an honor to be associated with you. And to be in this conversation with Ambassador the Honourable Joe Hockey. is really, particularly at this time, less than 1 week after the election, is a special occasion. I also want to pay my tribute to Joe. We're from different sides of politics, but I tell you, Joe has done an outstanding job as ambassador to Washington. I can't imagine really a more difficult, except maybe ambassador to North Korea, diplomatic assignment than being there when Donald Trump took office, and so effectively representing Australia's interests, smoothing out some rough patches. But reflecting on it, you have to say that there are two countries in the world which had excellent relations with the United States under Donald Trump, and one was Israel and the other was Australia. And it didn't happen by accident. It happened by the soundest management, deep thinking, and strategic implementation. It's an art. Diplomacy is an art form, and Joe practiced it. So it's wonderful to be with him. And Joe, if you want to start your video, and we can start our discussion.
I'm hoping I'm on. Oh, there. That was quick.
There you go.
Thank you, Bruce, for that generous introduction. Very generous.
Thank you, Joe. Here, let's just get into it. Here we are, 1 week after the election. What are your thoughts as it stands today, and what happened over the past several days?
Well, I think it's the right result, and it's the right result for America under the circumstances. I mean, the person that got the majority of the votes, and also won in a number of different disparate states, and one states off his opponent is Joe Biden. And he got more votes than any other candidate for president ever. But even on a comparative basis, it was the biggest turnout since 1900, so in 120 years. And, you know, Donald Trump's a formidable opponent. Joe Biden had a very disciplined campaign, there's no doubt about that. Way back in April, he was virtually written off before the primary in South Carolina. And Jim Clyburn, who you'd know of, leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, but a fabulous human being, was instrumental, in my view, in helping Joe Biden to come from fifth in the previous primary to win in South Carolina. And that was a tipping point. That was it. That was a moment that he had momentum. He started to get money, and his campaign lit up. What was incredibly impressive was the discipline of the Democratic Party. As you know, Bruce, it's a party that has carried some divisions, and I think it really hurt Hillary Clinton in the end when Bernie wouldn't go out and throw his support behind her. But this time, the party was very united. It was extremely well funded. I mean, the numbers that will come out, and the amount of money, for example, spent in North Carolina was unbelievable. And to try and win a seat off Lindsey Graham. But you know, they were humble all the way through, and no one was taking it for granted. And they were right to. I think Donald Trump got his energy in the last week of the campaign. Phenomenal energy. I mean, for someone that had just had coronavirus, let alone someone of his age, let alone anyone trying to do 5 rallies in a day, some after midnight, and you know, it's like doing a rock concert every 2 hours, right? If the campaign had gone on another week, he may well have won. He might have got that momentum. But I just think maybe the total number of people that were ever going to vote did vote in this election, and it was an extraordinary campaign. In the end, you know, the right result.
When you think, let's talk about Joe Biden for a moment. We'll certainly come back to Trump. But Joe Biden, it seems to me, is always underestimated, and he always then exceeded the what was expected of him, and he executed very cleanly. He, after coming back from being dead, right, in Iowa and New Hampshire, second in Nevada, then he wins South Carolina, and then he storms through Super Tuesday. No one expected, and he was out of money at that time, and he did it.
Yeah.
And then he brings the party together. You know, everyone endorsed him. And then he executes cleanly the selection of his vice president. And then in the midst of a pandemic, they still pull off a campaign It was completely different. No one had ever seen anything like it before. I mean, Trump ultimately tried to emulate what a normal campaign looks like. And they did that, reached people, got enough enthusiasm to get, and he'll be at least 6 million votes more than Trump, and maybe a little higher when the counting is stopped. So in thinking about who would be the antithesis of Trump, when you have a troubled president and then you look who succeeds him, well, what qualities does that person who succeeds him is? When Nixon and Watergate, you got this clean-skinned Southern governor, Jimmy Carter. After George W. Bush and the Iraq War, you have Barack Obama. So people are rebelling against Obama, you get Donald Trump. So who's the antithesis to Trump? And originally I thought it would be like Kamala Harris, an African-American woman, progressive. But no, it was an older white guy who has more deep experience commensurate with the crises the nation is facing, and that actually was an attribute for him. So I guess my question is, do you feel Biden really has what it takes to face up to the responsibilities of the office and the pandemic and the economy, and then there are collateral issues, Obamacare, racial justice, climate, but does he have the abilities to face up and do it and carry the country forward?
Well, yes, I think he does. I mean, he's got a world of experience. But just going back for a moment, this last election was pro-Trump versus anti-Trump. In my view, it wasn't really Trump versus Biden or Republicans versus Democrats. It was all about Donald Trump, as he's wanted for 4 years, as he's always wanted. It was all about Donald Trump, and the electorate made a decision that they were more in favour of the anti-Trump candidate than they were the Trump candidate. So Joe was a benign candidate. He was a non-controversial candidate. The only sort of misstep he made was in relation to fossil fuels, which could have cost Pennsylvania, but he had enough momentum in Pennsylvania to bring him home. After that, but otherwise, it was an incredibly disciplined campaign. And, you just wouldn't normally win an election by being a small target. And he was a small target the whole way through. I mean, he hardly came out for months. And Donald Trump was standing in the ring, boxing ring, swinging wildly, but there was no one there. And occasionally he was punching himself and quite brutally, especially when he talked about injecting, people with chlorine,
bleach.
Right?
Yeah,
with bleach. And there were moments where he just blew himself up along the way. But you could always still see a pathway for Donald Trump to win. And I kept saying this in an article, in various articles I was writing in the Australian. You can still see that pathway. Don't write him off. And 2 weeks before the election, when I think swing voters have made up their mind finally, on the back of his behaviour after he got coronavirus, that was the moment when he said, right, I've just got to expand the base. And that's when he had that intense round of rallies, which the Republicans, the RNC was scoffed at because they said, oh, well, the RNC said 30% of the people attending the rallies have never voted before. And everyone was dismissive of that. But it turned out that, as you say, Trump picked up a lot of new votes, by far more votes than any previous Republican. I mean, 10 million more than Mitt Romney, who was the last GOP presidential candidate, at least 7 million more than George Bush at his peak. So he did expand the base, particularly amongst black men in places like Michigan, which is extraordinary, and then Hispanics. And Hispanics obviously in Florida, but also I think in Texas as well. And so Joe Biden played it perfectly. Just skipping forward, it's going to be a very difficult time to govern for Joe Biden. I mean, we'll get to the Senate in a minute, but it's just a difficult country to govern at the moment and to unite. And I think his demeanour is perfect for the moment. Just calm, not making rash decisions, considered, just reassuring and experienced. If he has a hostile Senate, which is likely in my view, he's worked with Mitch McConnell for years. There'll be a dialogue. He knows how to treat the Senate, how to treat senators, and the same with the House. So he'll just know the right way to behave.
Yeah.
That will be reassuring, and that alone will be the Biden legacy that is most significant in this moment.
A lot of people, I agree with what you're saying here. A lot of people were rocked on the Democratic side. Were rocked by the size of the Trump vote, and rather than many of them, rather than seeing it as okay, we hear them and see them, but it's the gulf is too wide. That America can't heal. Is that your sense, or do you think with some inspired leadership of the type that Biden can project, that actually some bridges can be built and some comedy can break out?
I think the challenge in the United States, and look, it's the same all around the world in Western democracies, is that the differences are so wide between one extreme versus the other. Social media has made the voice of the critic much, much louder than the voice of the advocate. And those critics have previously been muted by their lack of scale. But social media has amplified their voices. So people in the middle are judging what is right and what is wrong by the loudness of the people on the fringes. And it's just a great shouting match between the left and the right. Joe Biden, in order to try and to win the hearts and minds of the majority of Americans, is off to a great start, because many more people like Joe Biden than voted for him. Many more in America. So he's off to a good start. There's a foundation there, probably amongst moderate Republicans, but also amongst the working class, that will give him a go. The question is how he handles it. And, as long as he doesn't go down the path of giving sanctimonious lectures about, some social policy issues, as long as he just doesn't, go to side with either Wall Street or Silicon Valley, because he's got to find a way to bring them all together, and maybe to take a leaf out of, Teddy Roosevelt's book and rail against, big business, and have antitrust legislation in relation to some of the biggest businesses. They're the sorts of things that will win, and also hold a firm line on China and a range of other things.
We'll get to China, obviously, and we want to talk about that a little bit. But two things. On the people around him, what's your sense of the people around him? And then when I hear their quality, caliber, outlook, in kind of general terms, and then I hear people say, well, we're just going to go back to Obama. It's going to be a reprise of the Obama presidency, with particularly on foreign policy. It's the same playbook. And do you see any differences today on Biden and how he'll go forward to what was with Obama and how he governed and did diplomacy?
Well, in terms of the personnel, they're very experienced around Joe Biden. I mean, if it so much depends on who he chooses in his cabinet. But if he has people like Michelle Flournoy and Bill Burns and Tony Blinken and all very capable, hugely knowledgeable people, and then he just builds out a team in the White House, people like Jake Sullivan, so all very competent operators, good operators, sensible, experienced, coming back from arrested period over the last 4 years, and
they're tanned, ready.
Yeah, I think they're battle ready. So I think that's probably the case. Look, on foreign policy, I expect Joe Biden will try and rebuild multilateralism. That's his style. That's, he's a consensus sort of person. And to be honest, that is the great advantage for the United States over some of its sort of different opponents, is that it has the capacity to bring together a coalition of interests, like almost no other country on earth. And I think Joe Biden's very aware of that. You'll see more of a human rights bent to some of his policies, which is, I think, a good thing. and will not give any comfort to China or Russia or some of the others. Secondly, I think he'll have more of a focus on Europe. The Indo-Pacific might feel a little bit lonely for a while. I don't see that as any significant difference, but certainly, traditional European partners will be a bit more buoyed by the election result. To be fair to Trump, the Middle East, has moved forward. And I don't see any great shift in policy there. If there were to be a reinvigoration of the JCPOA, I think that would be a mistake because, things have moved too far in the Middle East in various ways. I hope that the Biden administration will take an even greater focus in Latin America, where there are some real challenges. I mean, that's always, as you know, difficult for the US, being so close to home. Finally, in Asia, I think, there's a great deal of warmth out of India for Kamala Harris, which is outstanding. But they were very close to Trump as well. So that's a really good outcome for America to have the balance, with Kamala there. And obviously China is, I don't see any change in the actual relationship with China. I think the words will change, but I don't think there'll be any change.
I want to drill into that just a little bit further. On China, it seems to me we are in a Cold War. And on the security side, does it drift, particularly over Taiwan, over time into something much more serious and kinetic, as they say? But on the trade front, it is really unresolved. There was a phase 1 deal. God knows what a phase 2 looks like. The trade war is on. Australia is deeply enmeshed in it. And then you have what I like to call, in the first Cold War, there was an Iron Curtain, what I like to call a Silicon Curtain, has descended across the Asia Pacific. There is no World Wide Web, and we have 2 technology platforms and 2 different types of digital armaments facing off against each other. And what is, are we stuck to go through this, or is there another way to change the chessboard so that the US with its allies aligned as to what engagement with China should look like and should obtain from it? Because I think Trump actually identified the key structural issues in the relationship that need to be redressed on technology, investment, and other things. Can the leverage shift because the US is acting in a more multilateral way in engaging with China instead of just Trump, Xi, China, US?
It's going to be very difficult for both New Zealand and Australia, by the way. I think the US has had enough. China is completely friendless in the United States. It used to have a cohort of people in New York, like the Steve Schwartzmans of the world and a few others, who were constantly advocating for engagement with China, and they were right to do so. But, none of them have had good experiences, either commercially or in the case of the US, from a trade perspective more generally. And then, America has woken up to cybersecurity threats. And the more it's dug down, the more it's discovered what it didn't know about the theft of intellectual property and malfeasance by state-related actors, not just out of China, but out of other places as well. And what I witnessed was a sea change in Cyber Command and NSA and all of the agencies in relation to the potential threats. So can it be repaired? Yes, it can. The starting point is to be honest about China, but also to be, take a different approach. You can't give in to a bully. It doesn't. I heard Malcolm Turnbull say that last night, and he and I said it on multiple occasions when he was Prime Minister and I was Ambassador in a different context. You just never can give in to a bully. In fact, those sort of people will respect you more if you stand up to them. But you just can't publicly humiliate them. That's the point. It's all about face. And so we have to navigate a way through where China is, there's an engagement process, but also, in the arm wrestle of egos, there's got to be a sort of a toning down of that and a focus more on the real partnerships. Now, that will take, President Xi taking a step forward, meeting with Biden, as he did with Trump straight after Trump was elected. But it will also take China, through its various networks, engaging more with other countries and showing a little bit of white flesh as the other countries need to do the same. Because China hasn't worked out yet how to be a superpower, how to handle itself as a superpower.
So is it a moment of creative opportunity here where Australia can actually do some heavy collaboration with President Biden to just shift the dynamics a little bit so we get into a more constructive place?
Yeah, there will be a significant role for Scott Morrison in doing that. And yes, I think that there will be that opportunity, and it is a good opportunity. The question will be, how do you bring along other countries? How do you bring along India on that journey after the very aggressive actions of China towards India and the more aggressive actions of China in Pakistan? How do you bring along the Europeans who are, got different views, often not expressed, about Chinese influence in various places? And so it's a complicated and very much a full-time job. And, I don't want to overload Joe Biden's, playbook, because, I mean, my God, he's got the coronavirus, he's got a recession, and he's still got some, bad characters internationally, apart from, any individual countries that are trying to cause harm to America.
Just turning back to the U.S., and Joe, your country thanks you for throwing all those golf games with President Trump. So
I didn't throw all of them. I didn't throw the first one.
You beat you fair and square? Okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, mate, I played with Bill Clinton as well. And I love Bill Clinton. I genuinely love him. He's a fantastic human being. It took 7 hours to play with Bill Clinton and 2.5 hours to play with Donald Trump.
I remember
I
remember his plane from here was late leaving because he was playing golf until the cows came home.
Exactly. Yeah. Loves to chat and loves to take the same shot 3 times.
Yep. No, George H.W. Bush always said, he was amazed how often he was beaten after he left the White House.
Correct. Yeah.
That was pretty good. So Trump. So you know him a little bit. What is going through his head this week?
Well, I think he probably has convinced himself he was robbed, and he'll be frustrated that so far there hasn't been any comprehensive legal evidence to prove that he was robbed on a widespread basis. It needs to be widespread, so it needs to be in multiple states and multiple counties and of significant scale. And I think that's there's been no evidence of that so far, but I, wouldn't want to preempt, whatever the US legal system can throw up, which is, as you know,
plenty.
That's right. Lord knows. So he'll be thinking to himself, and look, I think he's been thinking it for a while. What next? And he will monetize his support base. He will set up a media platform. It could be mainstream media. It could be an alternative social media platform. I think Twitter and Facebook have handled this election really badly, and with this sort of confused censorship, it hasn't really been consistent. And of course, Fox did what they thought was right, which is, I have no doubt, was. But, that's given Trump a platform to say, look, there's no one out there speaking for you. I'm the only person that can. Here's the vehicles that I'm going to be using. I'll be using this new cable network, and I'll be using this social media platform. And then that's, that'll be his vehicle to wind up 70 million people to support him. He'll be looking at the Georgia runoff, which is on the 5th of January, which determines whether the Senate falls into the hands of the Democrats or is held by the Republicans. I think that's why Mitch McConnell has come behind him in the last 24 hours because of something we were talking about a little earlier, that, you know, if Donald Trump's not at the head of the ticket, if he's not fighting for that Senate, those 2 Senate seats in Georgia, then what's going to bring the Republicans out to vote? And that'll be, you know, $300 million spent by the 2 campaigns there, no doubt about that. So I can't see him conceding. I think he'll go into battle, you know, in one way or another on Georgia, and then of course he'll be, you know, the leader of the opposition in the United States, probably up until the midterms. In which case, you know, the Democrats will need to think carefully about how they present themselves at the midterms, because as you know, that's usually the time when there is a bit of a push against the incoming or whoever's in the majority at the time.
Joe, do you think that this means then that Trumpism has replaced Reaganism as the North Star of the Republican Party?
I'm worried that Trumpism has replaced, you know, liberal conservative, as we'd say in Australia, liberal conservative values. That you know, the cult of the individual has become so overwhelming that you know, the core centre-right values have been left behind. And now, you know, that's why it's really important that every political leader have a good hard look at, you know, at what the real reason is for 70 million people voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And you know, I had an experience, Bruce, in New York last week where this homeless man was walking down the street and he was goading the police. He was wearing a Make America Great hat again. And he was goading the police saying, "This man speaks for me." He was an African-American. And he was screaming out the front of Trump, "This man speaks for me. This man speaks for me." And there was an element of truth to it, right? I mean, Trump became the anti-establishment person, and how ironic it was given his history.
Kim Williams has asked along these lines, okay, so Trump hears that person, but then the way Trump acts is just something that we've never seen in a president of the United States before. There's no civility, he's vulgar, and you know what he does with women and all sorts of things. And so how can we have an upright political culture when this force is part of it? And does it really fundamentally impair the working of democracy? And how can we do better?
I think it comes down to the capacity of individuals to swim against the tide. If everyone is just following the flow of the river, then there's nowhere else to go. But you'll always respect someone that says, "Hang on, this is not right." And you know, consuming the media in the United States is hard work. I mean, it's just
exhausting.
I mean, it's exhausting. It is just. I watch Morning Joe every morning, and Joe Scarborough, you know, I've met a couple of times, and I think he's a really decent guy. And I keep turning it on, but after 10 or 15 minutes, I just couldn't stand another 3 hours of hatred of Trump. And I wasn't about to defend Trump. I couldn't watch Fox at night. It was just unwatchable, right? Where Donald Trump could do no bad, no wrong, right? And it was just trying to get in the middle ground is really, really hard. Even here in Australia, I said something the other day, and all of a sudden people jump on me from the left and someone else defends me on the right, and I'm going, no, it's not like that. Can we just think carefully about what I said? And I just, you know, I'm happy to be out of politics for that reason, because everyone's shouting at each other, and no one's.
It's terrible.
I don't know how to change that.
Well, hopefully, if Biden sets a tone, and hopefully there's a little virtuous circle that comes out of that, and that some things become out of bounds again, as they should be. Talk about being an ambassador before COVID and after COVID. COVID came late in your tenure. No, you were gone. Were you?
I was gone.
You were gone.
I left America COVID-free and came back and went, what the hell's happened? It was only 2 weeks.
So Arthur, though, faces different challenges than you did in just the mechanics of diplomacy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, on two fronts. Firstly, Arthur's done a really good job in very difficult circumstances. The first thing is that the laws changed, and basically candidates and their teams had nothing to do with foreign powers in the lead up to the election. And that meant that we couldn't build relationships at all, really, before the election was actually held. And the second thing is, social distancing is pretty much the norm in Washington DC. There are no large gatherings. There are smaller gatherings, and I don't know whether Arthur's held them or not. I'm sure he has, but it's a tough, really tough. Look, we're in a world. This is why I set up Bondi Partners. We're in a world where, because you can't meet people for the first time, you've got to rely on trusted relationships, the people that you either know or know of. And that's going to be the case in this world for some time. It's just going to be a really hard environment to meet people for the first time and to build trust without regular human interaction. And, that's building trust and building relationships is all part of diplomacy.
But it seems to me, though, that Australia really starts in a privileged position because of the great work that has been done over a couple decades now, really since the Clinton era in these modern times. And Australia is just so well regarded on both sides of the aisle, and the security, intelligence, and defense relationships are just so deep that it really is as untroubled a position to be in. When you think about your former colleagues who were there working, Australia is in a better place and can capitalize on it.
We are, and I'm mindful that we've got some Kiwis on board, and I don't want to say anything about the last Bledisloe Cup game, but
I was for the Kiwis. I just want to be on the record on that. I'm for the All Blacks. I'm an All Blacks guy.
Good luck to you. I'm hurting and I'm proud, and I'm hurting and I'm proud. I mean, I love my rugby almost as much as as life itself. But the Five Eyes intelligence partnership is really, really important now. As Rod said, 19 years in politics, and I never really appreciated how critical that intelligence and defence partnership was with the United States until I became the ambassador and saw everything. And we have an embassy of 400 people in the United States, in Washington. We have military personnel in 32 US states. And the engagement at every level operationally in intelligence and defence is crucial, and it will be the building blocks for further interaction in a range of different fields. So what we've seen over the last few years is the United States has started to close down a supply chain that it can't trust. And what we did when I was ambassador was and I did it with John McCain to start with, was start to get Australia into that trusted supply chain grouping, which in relation to defence was only the UK. And then Canada, I did a deal with David McNaughton, the Canadian ambassador. We both pushed at the same time with John McCain. We got those countries in. And to supply chains for the US military. That has now morphed into other areas. Telecommunications, Australia led on 5G and Huawei. US followed them. And then now we're seeing it in critical minerals, and we will see it extend into healthcare, into education, into a range of different areas. And it will be the trusted ally supply chain that will be able to get more involved in US commerce. But also, if you're not trusted, you'll be pushed out.
Mm-hmm. Let's turn, we have, in the time we have left, let's just turn to New Zealand. And it is differently situated than Australia. I would think that the Ardern-Biden relationships and Kamala Harris would be excellent, but it's differently positioned with respect to China and that engagement. Can you just reflect on that for a little bit for us?
Well, I think New Zealand has navigated the relationship with the United States and China really well. It's just got to be very careful in continuing to deeply engage at an operational level with the United States. You know, there's been a bit of difficulty over the years. As you know, Americans have very long memories. I think that's been repaired. I dealt a lot with Tim Grosser when he was the New Zealand ambassador, and he did a superb job up on the Hill. The current New Zealand ambassador is working hard as well in difficult circumstances. But, you know, I think New Zealand has that commercial relationship, particularly in dairy, with China. Somehow it's managed to navigate some of the challenges, but you know, it's got the balance about right. I mean, it's just, as long as it doesn't, you know, it's far be it for me to give New Zealand a lecture, and certainly not the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister, but it's just good to be careful in not upsetting either party, but also navigating that intelligence and defence partnership with the US really closely.
I actually, when Jacinda Ardern won her last election, and it was a thumping majority, just really something. And I was really impressed when she addressed the nation and she said, "I want to govern for all New Zealanders," and I am certain that the Biden team heard that, and I was then pleased to see that Biden's message is the same. He won a slimmer majority, but it was the same. But and that is, in these times when really people are reeling from the pandemic and the economy and everything, to have leaders stand up and say, "I'm for you, whether you were with me or not," is extremely powerful. And if we can keep that going, there may yet be hope that 2021 will be a year of redemption and recovery, which I think we all want very, very much. Joe, any further words before we turn to Johnny for a conclusion?
No, other than to say thank you for putting this on. I mean, the Trans-Tasman Business Circle is near and dear to my heart. My grandmother was a Kiwi, and you know, apparently one of my great-grandfathers, who was an alcoholic, ended up owning a pub in New Zealand, never to be seen again. So someone was buried there that's part of my DNA. But it was, you know, it's, I think, just to be gracious, that we all have a duty to help to be gracious about the victory or the defeat. And you know, our leadership through this business circle, but also in our daily lives, can just ease the tension a little bit. I came back to Australia, sit in quarantine, and I'm stunned how many people are emotional about the US elections.
It is.
I mean,
it's amazing. They're following it like they're following the electoral college maps like it's, you know, the lower North Shore, right, Joe? I mean, it's unbelievable.
Exactly. And you know what? It's not the same in Washington, D.C., which is 93% Democrat. I mean, people didn't have the same impassioned responses to whatever was said. It was.
I know.
I've been astounded. That has taken me by surprise, and the venom in the whole argument here in Australia. I mean, tone it down. You know, America's not. You might see, you know, 1,000 or 10,000 people in America rallying and cheering or whatever. You might see riots. But as George Bush said to me, it's not 1968. You know,
No,
it's not 1968. Right. And there's not 1 million people marching on Washington, you know, and there aren't guns going off, you know, against the crowds as there was in the 1920s. No, was it 20s? Or George?
It was the 20s, but in the 60s and 70s, there were bombings. Left-wing terrorists were bombing. Assassinations. In assassinations, they had bombings in New York City, townhouses blowing up.
Exactly.
The civil rights movement was extremely violent. You had George Wallace pushing buttons all over the country.
Yeah.
However, these are tough times, and it does require what you're talking about.
Yeah.
People stepping back and saying, "We have more in common than divide us."
Correct. Exactly.
Which is why, Joe, you and I are here.
Exactly. That's right. And by the way, we all need America to be great, guys. We all do, no matter what. It's in our personal interests and our national interests that America be a strong, vibrant beacon of freedom as it has been for many years.
I can't improve on that. Johnny, over to you.
Thank you, Bruce. And this is like a dinner party. You never want to go home. You know, it's just fascinating and riveting, and we are all totally absorbed. Joe, you're right about Australians taking a huge interest. And my wife, her family's from New York, and we always look, wondering why Trump got the support. Look at the Des Moines, Iowa register. And the poll is after the basketball and after the street, the accident and the schooling. And you're right, a fascination in Australia. A great tribute to you, as Bruce said, for your host, your ambassadorship. We all agree entirely. You made a hell of a difference to unconventional presidency. And I'll leave it at that. The wonderful contribution can be hugely proud, and we look forward to your new career in Bondi Partners. As you say, trust is the essence of all of our relationships, and talking and not shouting is absolutely the essence of our society, and we pray for that for the United States as well. Our business sentiment survey, it's just how everybody feels. Joe, you're in your hotel room, but now you can see what everybody else is feeling. We invite everybody to fill that out. And Bruce, okay, we're feeling innovative challenge equally. The government consistently has been seen to be doing a great job across Australia and New Zealand. Over 12 months is our predominant view. Most people will be coming back to work for 1 to 3 days a week coming up, and still getting closer to having physical activity. Bruce, thank you again for wonderful moderation. It was such a pleasure to have you. It was a real conversation. Thank you everybody for joining us, and good day.